In the heart of Montana, where the Rockies clawed at the endless sky and the wind carried whispers of forgotten gold rushes, Eliza Harper knelt on the warped pine floor of a crumbling cabin. The year was 1887, and the world outside was a brutal expanse of snow-dusted plains and jagged peaks, but inside this shelter, time seemed to pause. The woman in his arms, Clara Beaumont, trembled not from the cold seeping through the chinks in the logs, but from the weight of what they had just done. Elias's coat, a threadbare wool thing patched with whatever hide he could trap, hung loose over his broad shoulders. His beard, dark and unkempt, scratched against Clara's cheek as he pulled her closer. The arrow in the image wasn't there in reality, but if it had been, it would have pointed to the scar running along his jaw, a memento from a Shoshone raid 3 winters past. His eyes, storm gray and unyielding, scanned the dim room, searching for threats that weren't there. Not yet. Clara's dress, once a fine silk thing from her life back in Philadelphia, was now a tattered remnant, its pale blue faded to the color of a winter sky. The gold bangles on her wrist, her mother's, a wedding gift from a world of ballrooms and gaslight, clinked softly as she gripped Elias's arm. Her blonde hair, pinned up in a hasty knot, had loosened, strands framing a face streaked with dirt and tears. She wasn't crying now, though. She was listening. "They're coming," she whispered, her voice barely louder than the crackle of the dying fire. "I heard hooves. More than one rider." Elias nodded, his hand already on the Colt revolver tucked into his belt. The cabin, a forgotten trapper's shack on the edge of the Yellowstone River, had been their refuge for 2 days. 2 days since they'd fled Bozeman with a posse on their tail. 2 days since Clara had shot a man in cold blood to save Elias's life. It had started in a saloon, of all places. Elias, a drifter with a past he didn't talk about, had been playing cards with a group of ranchers. Clara, newly arrived from the east to claim an inheritance from an uncle she'd never met, had been singing for tips. Her voice, clear and haunting, had drawn every eye in the room, including that of Jedediah Crow, the meanest cattle baron in the territory. Crow had taken a liking to Clara, and when she refused his advances, he'd made it clear she'd regret it. Elias, who'd seen enough of men like Crow to know trouble when it walked in wearing spurs, had stepped in. Words were exchanged. Fists flew. And then, when Crow's men cornered Elias in an alley, Clara had appeared with a derringer she'd bought off a traveling salesman. One shot, straight through Crow's shoulder. The man had lived, but his pride hadn't. Now, every bounty hunter from Helena to Cheyenne was after them, dead or alive. The cabin's single window let in a sliver of moonlight, enough to see the frost creeping up the glass. Elias eased Clara onto a pile of blankets near the fire, then moved to the door. He pressed his ear to the wood, listening. The wind howled, but beneath it, he caught the faint jingle of tack. Horses. Close. Stay low, he murmured, pulling a rifle from its hiding place under the floorboards. The weapon was old, its stock cracked, but it had served him well in the war. He didn't like to think about the war. Clara crawled to the window, peering out. 3 riders, she said, her voice steady now. No, 4. One's got a torch. Elias cursed under his breath. Torch meant they weren't here to talk. He glanced at Clara, her face lit by the fire's glow, and felt something twist in his chest. She wasn't built for this life. She was a city girl, raised on poetry and piano lessons, not blood and running. But she'd chosen this. Chosen him. Clara, he said, keeping his voice low. There's a root cellar under the trapdoor. You get in there, you hear me. Don't come out till it's quiet. I'm not leaving you, she said, her chin lifting in that stubborn way he'd come to admire. She reached for the derringer, checking its load. 2 shots left. You don't get a say, he snapped, harsher than he meant. This ain't about pride. It's about you livin'. She met his gaze, and for a moment, the cabin was silent except for the wind. Then she nodded, once, and moved to the trapdoor. Elias lifted it, revealing a narrow ladder leading into darkness. She descended, her bangles clinking softly, and he lowered the door behind her. The riders were closer now. He could hear their voices, rough and drunk on whiskey and vengeance. Harper. We know you're in there. One shouted. Come out, or we burn it down. Elias positioned himself by the window, rifle ready. He wasn't a praying man, but he sent up a silent plea anyway. Not for himself. For her. The first shot came from outside, splintering the doorframe. Elias fired back, the rifle's roar deafening in the small space. A scream answered him, one down. The others scattered, using the trees for cover. He reloaded, his hands steady despite the adrenaline coursing through him. Minutes stretched into an eternity. Bullets tore through the walls, sending clouds of dust into the air. Elias kept firing, picking his shots carefully. Another man fell, clutching his leg. The torch-bearer tried to light the cabin's wall, but a bullet took him in the chest before he could. Then, silence. Elias waited, counting heartbeats. Finally, he heard the sound of horses retreating, their riders cursing as they fled. He didn't trust it. Men like crows didn't give up easy. He opened the trapdoor. Clara. She climbed out, her face pale but determined. Are they gone? For now. He scanned her for injuries, finding none. Relief hit him harder than any bullet could. We can't stay. They'll be back with more. Clara nodded, already gathering their meager supplies, a blanket, a canteen, a sack of jerky. Where to? North, he said. Canada's not far. We cross the border, we're ghosts. They slipped out into the night, the cabin smoldering behind them. The air was bitter, the ground crunching under their boots. Elias led the way, his hand never far from his gun. Clara followed, her breath visible in the moonlight. As they crested a ridge, she spoke. Elias, why'd you do it? Back in Bozeman. You could have walked away. He stopped, turning to face her. The wind whipped his coat around his legs. Because some things are worth fighting for, he said. And you, Clara Beaumont, are one of them. Her eyes softened, and for the first time in days, she smiled. It was small, tired, but real. She took his hand, and together they walked into the darkness, two fugitives bound by blood and choice. Behind them, the cabin burned, its light fading against the vast Montana sky. Ahead lay an uncertain future, but for now, they had each other. And in a land where law was a suggestion and survival was a daily gamble, that was enough. The trail to Canada was long, fraught with blizzards and bounty hunters, but Elias and Clara pressed on. They learned to move like shadows, to trust the land and each other. Clara's hands, once soft, grew calloused from handling reins and rifles. Elias taught her to track, to shoot, to read the stars. She taught him to laugh again, to remember there was more to life than running. Months later, in a small trading post near the border, they heard the news. Jedediah Crow had died of infection from his wound. The posse disbanded. The price on their heads vanished. They didn't go back. Montana held too many ghosts. Instead, they built a life in the wilds of British Columbia, in a valley where the rivers ran clear and the mountains stood guard. Elias trapped and hunted. Clara sang for their supper, her voice drawing travelers from miles around. They never spoke of Bozeman again, but sometimes, when the fire burned low and the night was quiet, Clara would touch the scar on Elias's jaw and remember the cabin, the gunfire, the choice that bound them. In the end, they weren't legends. Just two people who'd chosen love over fear, in a land that forgave no one. And that, in the vastness of the American West, was a story worth telling.